Ever feel like some industries are stuck using like outdated tech?
Hmm.
I was reading about this factory, right? And they were still using, get this, paper to track inventory.
Wow.
I know. In 2024, we've got robots like roaming around on Mars, but some factories are practically in the Stone Age.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
So that's what I'm so stoked to dig into in this deep dive.
Hmm.
Cloud manufacturing. We're going to break down how this tech can help factories ditch the Stone Age systems, and jump into the future. And a good place to start. Cost reduction and how to minimize waste.
You're definitely you're hitting on something that a lot of manufacturers struggle with.
Mm.
If you think about those old systems, all the servers and software and the constant upkeep, it's a lot. They're outdated.
Yeah.
Cloud computing really changes things.
Okay, so for anyone who hasn't quite, jumped on the cloud bandwagon yet, can you break down what that shift actually looks like? Like, what are we talking about here?
Imagine if you could, instead of having all those servers on site, you could swap them out for something like a streaming service for your factory.
Okay.
That's cloud computing. You're not stuck buying and managing all that expensive hardware. It's more like renting what you need when you need it.
Mm.
And that can make a huge difference to your bottom line.
Yeah, the article we're looking at mentions something like a 30% reduction in IT costs, which is, that's huge for any business, but especially in manufacturing where, margins are already pretty tight. So is it really as simple as just swapping out hardware, or is there more to it?
It's definitely more than just the hardware. The real game changer with the cloud is how flexible it is. Let's say you all of a sudden need to ramp up production, like to meet a demand surge.
Right.
Traditionally, that would have meant scrambling to order new servers, install them. It was a whole thing, and you just hoped everything worked without a hitch. With cloud computing, though, you can scale things up or down, for that matter, almost instantly.
So it's as much about agility as it is about saving money.
Exactly. That ability to adapt quickly,
Yeah.
that translates into a more efficient operation overall. Some studies suggest that adopting cloud tech can boost production efficiency by 10–20%, which is, wow, it's significant. And it's not just about the financials either. This efficiency also has a huge impact on the environment, which is something a lot of companies are becoming more and more aware of.
And that's something I definitely want to dig into because we hear a lot about the energy consumption of data centers, right? But this article actually argues that switching to cloud-based solutions can be a win for sustainability, which seems kind of counterintuitive.
It does, right?
Yeah.
But you have to think about the scale that these cloud providers operate at. They have these huge, super efficient data centers that use way less energy for the same amount of computing power than a regular factory could ever achieve.
Okay.
We're talking about a potential 87% reduction in energy use just by making the switch.
That's incredible.
It is.
And it kind of speaks to a bigger thing that really struck me when I was reading this article, how cloud tech can help cut down on waste in ways you might not expect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that comes down to real-time data and analytics, which the cloud makes possible in a whole new way.
So we're talking about data and analytics, and I gotta say, my eyes kind of glaze over at spreadsheets.
Yeah.
But we're talking about less waste, right? So how does all this data actually translate to, like, real changes on the factory floor?
It's about going beyond spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Think of it more like giving the factory a whole sensory system. Like imagine sensors everywhere, and they're feeding information back to the cloud constantly.
Okay.
So you've got these sensors measuring temperature, pressure, even like tiny vibrations in the machinery, and all that data is going straight to the cloud.
So it's like giving the factory a sixth sense almost. It can, like, feel what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. But it's the cloud that makes sense of it all, right? Those cloud-based analytics platforms can spot these tiny inefficiencies, the tiniest things that a person would never even notice.
And those tiny things can make a big difference.
Huge. Let's say a motor's drawing a bit more power than usual.
Mm-hmm.
It could be nothing, or it could be an early warning sign of a breakdown.
Oh, I see. So you can fix it before it becomes a big problem, which means less downtime, fewer materials wasted.
Exactly. It's about being proactive, making decisions based on data in real time, optimizing everything. And when you apply that to how you manage materials, that's when you see the waste reduction go way down.
The article mentioned a 40% reduction in material waste, which just seems unbelievable. Do you have an example of how that would actually play out in a factory? Like, what's that look like in action?
Sure. Think about a company that makes, let's say, drinks, and they use a ton of plastic for the bottles, right?
Mm-hmm.
They could have sensors that measure the thickness of the plastic in real time as it's being used.
Mm-hmm.
And the cloud system might pick up on the fact that, The plastic's consistently thicker than it needs to be. That's extra material, extra waste right there.
Yeah, and they could adjust the machines to use the right amount, so you're cutting down on waste without skimping on quality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's bigger than just one machine. The cloud can optimize like entire production runs. Let's
Mhm.
say you're making furniture and you have to cut tons of wood for a specific chair design.
Okay.
A cloud system could look at the order data, and figure out the absolute best way to cut the wood to minimize waste. It can even automatically adjust the cutting machines.
Wow, it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about how much waste happens just because, well, because we haven't had this level of control. We haven't been able to see everything that's going on.
It's a whole new level of visibility. And this data-driven approach, it doesn't stop at the factory doors. It's changing how companies handle their entire supply chain.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We started with factories using like literal paper, and now we're talking about factories with a sixth sense thanks to the cloud.
Oh.
But let's talk about supply chains because a factory can be running like a well-oiled machine. But if the supply chain's a mess, then what, right?
You're right. It can all fall apart pretty quickly. And the article actually, it makes a really good point about how the cloud can bring some order to the chaos. Like
Right.
traditionally, companies don't really have a clear picture of what's happening with their suppliers or their materials.
Yeah, they're in the dark.
It's like they're blindfolded. Like once a shipment leaves the factory,
Mm.
who knows, right?
It's a recipe for disaster. Delays, stuff getting lost, wasted.
Uh-huh.
So how does the cloud fix that?
Imagine like a digital dashboard. So everyone involved, from the suppliers to the factory managers to the shipping company, everyone can see what's happening in real time.
Everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. Inventory, schedules, you name it. And that level of transparency, it makes a huge difference. For example, the article talked about just-in-time inventory. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, yeah.
So instead of having like a massive stockpile of materials, manufacturers can use the cloud to coordinate with suppliers to get materials delivered only when they're needed.
So less warehousing, less waste, and I imagine it saves a lot of money too.
Absolutely. Less waste, lower costs, it's all connected. And this goes beyond inventory too. You can optimize like deliveries and routes, that sort of thing.
How so?
So let's say you have a fleet of delivery trucks. They've got sensors, GPS, all that. The cloud can track traffic, weather, even fuel efficiency, and figure out the absolute best route for each truck.
So you save time, you save money, and you're also cutting down on emissions. It's a win-win.
Exactly. And this ability to track data across the whole supply chain, it also helps companies be more environmentally responsible, which is a big deal these days.
Right. Consumers are way more conscious of that now.
For sure. We're talking about tracking everything. Energy use, water use, waste, emissions, all of it. And there's studies showing that these cloud-based tools can actually help reduce greenhouse gases by up to 15%. So it's not just talk, it's real change.
So we've talked about how cloud tech can save money, reduce waste, make factories smarter, even make supply chains more efficient. As we wrap up, what's the one big thing you hope listeners take away from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that cloud computing, it's more than just tech. It has the potential to change the way we make things, period. It's about helping companies become more efficient, more adaptable, more responsible, especially now when the world's facing so many challenges.
It's about building a better future, a smarter future, one factory at a time, I guess. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the cloud.